Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, this is Rhonda's Radio Journal, and I'm continuing putting into this journal reading something from a book I'm working on right now called Crisis in the Church. If you didn't read the opening, if you didn't listen to the opening introduction, which is number 7 of these radio journals, go back to that first or nothing will make sense. So we're now on the morning session, and it's day 1, morning session, questions for group sharing. And here are the questions that Rhonda and James are going to talk about. And the first one, which was for all the tables of these participants, is where do you fit on the spectrum of categories of Catholics 1 to 5? Many Catholics don't fit neatly into any of these 5 categories. They have a mixture of things they agree or disagree about in church teaching without fitting into a pattern. If you are one of these, when you talk about where you fit in the spectrum, just explain what you identify with in any of them. The second question is, each seminar participant will now have a turn to tell the others about his or her Catholic background, such as baptized as a baby, a convert, revert, returning to the church after a hiatus, etc., what their family was like as in strong daily Mass Catholics, strong faithful Catholics going to church every Sunday and holy days, somewhat faithful Catholics, one parent receiving communion, the other not, your children going to Catholic schools, and so forth. So if you are not finished with this by lunchtime, continue this afternoon so each one has a turn. And then the schedule has on it, after these questions, noon Mass, then lunch and rest, then prayer in the Adoration Chapel, and then afternoon session where you continue with any sharings not finished in the morning session and then respond to question 3. So 3 was talk about how your views about the church developed during graduate school and in your work settings and ministry. Then there's dinner, and then there's a healing session. So now Rhonda and James are sitting at their table, and Rhonda says, okay, let's look at question 1. What type in that spectrum did you identify with, James? James: I would certainly describe myself as a type 2, Rhonda, and I would identify with type 4. Do you mind telling me which of the things under type 1, radical progressive, you do agree with? Not at all. I agree there should be women priests and same-sex priests. About same-sex unions, I think they should be blessed but not called marriages. But I'm absolutely pro-life. Still, I could never vote for a Republican who is pro-life but has no heart for the poor. If you recall, I'm a both-and person. You are more an either-or person. James was in parentheses, James was referring to a distinction made in philosophy, originally based on the contrast between Hegel and Kierkegaard, where Hegel saw the history of thought involving a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis, both and. The synthesis is both and. Kierkegaard thought we need to choose between ultimate values in an either-or manner. Rhonda, I'm glad to hear you are pro-life. You know that is my big issue, and for 30 years I prayed and talked to women in front of abortion mills to tell them how we could help them. James, I remember. I admired you for that. Well, let's look at sharing question 2. Rhonda, you know a lot of my background, of course, but it's been so long you may need a brief reminder. So I was brought up as a total atheist whose parents met in the Communist Party, but then became anti-communist. I looked for truth in philosophy, but in my non-religious colleges only found skepticism and relativism. I looked for love in affairs, but these relationships produced despair. By 20, I thought it better to commit suicide if all there was in life was suffering. At this point, James took my hand and gave me that empathetic glance with his large blue eyes I had loved so much when we were seeing each other in the 90s. Then Rhonda goes on. Then the miracles happened that led me into the Catholic Church with the help also of great books in defense of Christianity, such as those of C.S. Lewis, and of the Catholic Church, especially of Chesterton and Cardinal Newman. At 21, I became a daily Mass Catholic. James, of course my story is much less dramatic. I was brought up in a French-Canadian ancestry family in Louisiana. My parents were faithful to all the teachings of the Church and all its practices. Curiosity about the North and about life in New York City led me to St. Athanasius, where I majored in philosophy and stayed to finish my doctorate. And I've been teaching here at St. Athanasius ever since. With almost an hour before Mass, while those at the other tables took their turn sharing, James and I spent the remaining time with me catching him up on my numerous teaching and ministry jobs after we drifted apart in the 90s. Now they go to Mass, and they should go to lunch. No, they go to Mass first and then lunch. Okay, they go to Mass. Our family and here is what she says about this Mass. Our family having moved to the suburbs after my PhD studies, I was rarely at the chapel at St. Athanasius. It was moving to me to see Father Doria, my beloved university president, now so much older, but still the same in many precious ways. Without being casual, he intoned the words of the more than 2,000-year ritual with warmth. At the consecration, I could still see the expression of rapt awe in his face that used to lift me out of my usually distracted thoughts. The peace gesture of the congregation was also warm, even though most of us didn't know each other, coming from graduations during different decades of the 20th and 21st centuries. In Father Doria's homily, the thing that stood out most for me were his remarks about Jesus being the way, the truth, and the life. He quipped in his usual funny way, "Of course, each of you noble professors tend to think that your own teachings are the way, then the truth. At this seminar, however, we need to open ourselves to the presence of Jesus, so we're not only exchanging our own concepts. Ask Jesus to come into your prayer time in a special way at adoration before the afternoon session." Now we have lunch, and obeying Father Doria's insistence that we sit with other participants during lunch than the ones in our session group, I joined a table with much younger PhDs, now all professors teaching in many different areas of the United States. We began by introducing ourselves, telling when we were in the PhD program at the university and where we had taught since. After that, here are some of the things said around my table. Well, we know we're all here because we love Father Doria, such a teddy bear priest, warm, round, affable, and he probably helped all of us through hard times during our doctoral studies. But I don't really like being shoved under these numbers in that spectrum of his. And someone else says, I do love Father Doria, and that's why I would never call him a teddy bear priest. That is so disrespectful. Then another one says, that spectrum gives me the feeling of them versus us that in itself represents a church divided. Suppose someone says, I don't like the us versus... Okay. Sorry, I found an error there. Father Doria, here's someone else. Father Doria said we all believe in the Trinity, but I read in a liberation theology book that some think Mary is the fourth person of the Godhead. And someone else says, I bet there are no ones and fives here because they don't believe in dialogue with those totally on the other side. Maybe all twos and fours are here to influence the moderates. Another says, funnily, should we leave the last day with T-shirts imprinted with the spectrum and our number with a check on it? Another says, I wonder where Father Doria puts himself in that spectrum. Where would you put him? Some thought there needed to be something between 3 and 4 to have a place for those who love all the faiths but aren't militant and wouldn't challenge Pope Francis on anything. Now at the adoration prayer, that's the new head. After a nap, I went to the dear old chapel for adoration prayer. I like to joke that the setup of adoration with the large Eucharistic host on the altar is good for me because Jesus is the center, not me. Almost all the participants came to adoration. It was moving to see them not talking but in deep prayer. In my heart, I asked Jesus, why am I afraid to be in this seminar? He seemed to reply with inaudible words, that's words in my heart, because you think that your opponents in the church are nibbling away at your life raft. But they can't. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and I will be victorious. Now we come to the afternoon session. When I came back to the auditorium to look for James, he had the schedule open at our table. Question 3. How did you see these divisions developing in the course of your work as a theology or philosophy professor and or in your ministries? With what adjectives do you describe your present stance? James said, I'd like to begin. I find that those unfamiliar with church history, as I studied it as a theology grad student, don't seem to realize that there have always been divisions in the church. You need only think of the Arian heresy where most of the bishops disagreed with what became the official teaching about the nature of the second person in the Trinity. Or think of the Illuminati at the time of St. Francis, their exaggerated, strange ideas about marriage. Or those Jansenists with their rigorous way of making optional choices into absolutes, challenging the Jesuits, who were then mostly very lax, followed by modernism in the church fought against by Cardinal Newman. Rhonda. When I was researching the great women saints and mystics, I was amazed to read that there were actually saints backing different alleged popes in the time where St. Catherine of Siena persuaded one of them to return to Rome. And of course, a division that is not in Father Doria's spectrum would be all those non-practicing Catholics who Protestant churches boast of having taken over. But of course, it's different to read about these past divisions than to experience them at the universities we teach and often dividing our families. James. Now, I remember telling you years ago about my substantial on-site research into Native American religion and later Islam. My life as a professor and a theological writer greatly expanded my understanding of the insights of these religions. Not to diminish my love of our Catholic Church, but to lead me away from the kind of triumphalism so current before Vatican II. I have in parentheses, for any readers unfamiliar with that term, triumphalism is taking inordinate pride in the success of a political party or religious institution. James continues, I mean, we used to talk as if the Catholic Church had all the truth and other religions were simply bogus. Rhonda, my experience was so different. I had studied Catholic philosophy with the great Dietrich von Hildebrand. Right after Vatican II, I started reading the National Catholic Reporter and hearing that there were theologians who thought the Church would change its position on contraception. I was veering toward what Father Doria would call a moderate Catholic position, open to evolution in Church moral teaching. But then von Hildebrand wrote his thunderous refutation of such divergences under the title The Trojan Horse in the City of God. His disciples started reading the more orthodox National Catholic Register. Then, when I began teaching ethics myself at St. Paul's College in New Rochelle, I was appalled to find that the priest chaplains would tell couples that if they loved each other, sex before marriage was okay. And then say, Dr. Ronda is only a lay person. What does she know? One of them told one of these students. 3 months later, that unmarried couple was planning to abort their newly conceived baby because it would wreck up their college plans to have a baby just then. The priest seemed totally surprised that this could happen. I talked them out of it and loved to see the young woman with that baby in a stroller bringing him to classes and witnessing in that way to her pro-life decision. I went through years of opposition from other philosophy faculty at St. Paul's. I responded by writing my own ethics book, Living in Love about Christian Ethics. By the time I retired 3 years ago, I had taught several generations why Catholic teaching is so true. James, let's dialogue about these issues as we come to them in the days to follow. Fundamentally, I doubt that I disagree with you about moral teachings, but more that I think the root cause of choosing the wrong path is not lack of understanding, but more lack of a deeper spirituality. Right now, I'd like to hear more about your book about the widow saints I noticed in the library this afternoon. Before dinner, Father Doria came around to make this announcement. Please try to sit with some you didn't meet at the 2 sessions or at lunch, please. Also, I would like you to share about incidents that happened or you read about which gave you a new perspective on something involving church issues. There were drinks available at the small bar in the dining room. A senior at the college agreed to serve in exchange for free drinks for himself. Laughter. Now we go to dinner. I thought. Ask for a Bloody Mary, a drink I used to have with my husband on occasion, or just get a Coke so I won't possibly scandal anyone as a dedicated widow in this pseudo-nun-looking outfit needing to drink. I compromised by selecting a small bottle of wine. Alas, at 82, it's hard for me to open such a bottle. One of the young women professors took it off my hand. It gave me the opportunity to share my favorite aging maxim. When I can't do something like open a bottle or lift a parcel, I say to myself, well, Rhonda, if someone offered you $500 to figure it out, could you do it? It works like a charm. Within 5 minutes, I've solved the problem. But since you're so young and strong, I'll just let you help me. When we got around to sharing about surprising incidents which helped us with division in the church, here are some of the ones I liked. Here's what someone else said. I just happened to read a memoir of an Episcopal pastor of the 1920s in the U.S. Now, I always thought of Episcopalians as being kind of a mediocre compromise between Catholic and evangelical. but this author shortchanged my mind. He had an incredible ministry to the poor. Even if there was a huge snowstorm, he would ride through the night to reach some poor woman expecting a baby, bringing the family their first real stove. He was belittled by high church Episcopals for providing free dinners at every service instead of stressing only worship. Another participant told this anecdote. I was arguing with another professor about church division. She suddenly said, "You don't think that theology professors will save the church, do you? The anawim, that means the poor and uneducated, will save the church." Here is the account of the healing session. Father Doria, now, dear PhDs, I want to lead you in a healing session. I have spent many hours in adoration prayer composing these reflections and exercises. After all, in this seminar, I'm not trying to hone up your skills as debaters, but rather as lovers of Christ in the church. However, I realize that some of you fours will think that even talking about healing is a covert way of trying to make it seem as if divisions could be sugar-coated simply by becoming a nice, tolerant church. Not really. I guess you wouldn't have come to this seminar unless you trusted me to surprise you. Let us begin with prayer. Holy Spirit, pour out your gifts upon us, especially the gift of wisdom. Overcome with forgiving love, anger coming from wounds attributed to opposition from those in other parts of the spectrum. Father Doria looked around at the mostly skeptical faces of his graduate students. Impossible? Come on. How many of you saw the movie The Passion? Many raised their hands. If Jesus could forgive those torturers and the leaders that arranged for his crucifixion, who could you not forgive? Now, don't think I'm asking you to renounce the truths you hold after many years of thought to get to some phony unity. My hope is that each of us may be enlightened in a new way by our dialogues, but also there would be less anger even when we disagree. Surely none of us Catholics are hoping for a time when every major disagreement leads to a new schism until one day we are like the 40,000 divisions of the non-Catholic Christian Church. Everybody laughed. We will be offering sacramental confession in the chapel area starting at 8 p.m. 2 priest friends of mine have agreed to be there, and I will also be hearing confession. I noticed that quite a few participants who looked wary when Father Doria started speaking now look more relaxed with hands on their tables instead of crossed across their chests. Father Doria then began to speak of the theme of this evening's healing service. As you all know, I've been teaching Catholic anger management for many years. One of the theories I've taken over from non-religious counselors is that underneath anger is fear. How so? Consider this scenario. It's winter and the windows of the car are closed. Even though the bad driver who has greatly angered a man on his way to work can't possibly hear him, our hero is yelling curses at the man at the wheel in the speeding car. Can you see that underlying the curses driver's rage is the fear that such drivers can often cause death-dealing accidents on the road? By contrast, I was told by one of his carpoolers that one of our professors here at St. Athanasius actually prayed aloud for every bad driver as he passed. Now the analogy. A Catholic leader, number 4 on the spectrum, is enraged by reports of priests involved in scandalous sins with minors. Our leader often imagines what these might have been, glad to read more and more of the explicit accounts. She's enraged to read about cover-ups past and present day. What is the fear behind the anger? Probably it would be some of these. My son or grandson might go through this sexual abuse. It might even lead him to become a pederast one day. Do I have to homeschool my male children because I don't trust even the parochial school I have been sending them to? If I can't possibly know the truth about allegations concerning priests, how do I know I'm not shunning a priest who is really innocent? Now let's look at anger and fear of a number 2 post-Vatican II Catholic. A music minister in the parish is angry at the new pastor. The choir director has been working with the singers and the parishioners to build up wonderful weekend masses with almost everyone actively participating. He remembers with horror how in the past you could see rows of old ladies praying the rosary during the Mass, only joining in an Ave Maria hymn occasionally. Now, the new pastor is insisting on a Latin High Mass every Sunday. He had the nerve to ask me if I would like to take an online course in Gregorian chant. What is the fear underlying the choir's director's anger? In 6 months, this priest may hire someone else to take my place. This parish could be taken over by those fanatical rad trad. Our bishop may have put this priest in precisely to bring about such changes. So what is the anger? The answer, anger, fear, or, question mark, question mark, question mark. Before offering healing meditations, I would like each of you present tonight to silently answer this question. What am I most angry about that Catholics in other places on the spectrum than my own have done or said? Take 10 minutes to answer this or explain why you are not angry when others are. If you're a radio listener right now, maybe you could take 10 minutes and do that yourself. The auditorium became completely silent. I, Rhonda, thought about how angry I was when other professors at my Catholic college taught the students in ways opposite to what I was teaching. One that got me angrier and angrier is the subtle assumption some made that all religions are good so we don't have to evangelize. Then Father Doria says, now please take another 10 minutes to try to see what the fear behind your anger is. If you are not angry, review what gifts of nature or graces you have received that keep you serene when you experience or undergo injustice. So why are you not angry in the same types of situations? At first, I, Rhonda, was not sure what the fear was. Then I got it. Of course, I'm afraid of having less and less Catholics. I'm afraid they will leave for another religion just because something there was appealing to them, such as transcendental meditation. I could wind up being in a tiny minority church like the Amish. Father Doria, now I will present a healing prayer about anger and fear. As I speak, you insert into it the people who have angered you and your own fears. If you're not angry, use this time to pray for those who are. Since you are all Catholic scholars, you surely have heard of St. Augustine's famous maxim, hate the sin, love the sinner. Now each one think of that thing in the church you feel most angry about. Now talk to Jesus and tell him about your anger. Take about 5 minutes to do this. I, Rhonda, spoke to Jesus about my anger at those who don't think that the Catholic Church is the one true church and that others are just as good. Father Doria, now imagine what Jesus might be telling you about his anger about the same thing. Of course, you are all sophisticated enough PhDs and professors to know that we're not to take such inner messages as infallible. But that doesn't mean that Jesus doesn't want to talk to us this way either. To use the examples I told you about, with a 4 and a 2, Jesus might tell you in your heart something like this. If you were scandalized about priests abusing boys, think how I feel. I chose this man to be a priest and have given him enormous graces to overcome sinful tendencies. And then he turns his back on me and gets into evil and also great failure in his vocation. In the case of the choir director, Jesus might say something like this. In my time, rabbis sang their teaching. I love to hear a whole church full of people singing loudly, whether it is in Latin or in the vernacular of each country. I'm sad that your good initiatives are at risk. Of course, I realize that some of you are not accustomed to hearing words in the heart when you pray. Try to open yourselves to that possibility tonight, but if that doesn't come now, ask the Holy Spirit to enlighten your minds with good thoughts of your own. When Rhonda asked Jesus what he thought about our church versus other religions, he seemed to teach me, I formed the Catholic Church. It is mine. I wish that everyone in the world were Catholics. It grieves me when Catholics leave my church. Father Doria. Now let us pray for healing of the fear. Father Doria, hear Jesus telling me this about the two examples. Out of the scandals, I'm raising up a church of pure, holy priests. Even though it is just when lay people protest sexual sins of priests and cover-ups, I don't want them to be consumed with fear. Cling to the priests you trust, but also pray for repentance and conversion of the ones who've fallen. About the choir director, I hear Jesus recommending that he have a long conversation with the new priest about the values he sees in what he has done for the parish, and suggesting that they have a Latin Gregorian chant once a month to start, and that he would be willing to look into that type of music himself. Now try to see what Jesus is telling you about your fears in your own example. Rhonda heard Jesus telling me that he has inspired me to love the church and its truth, but that he also wants me to learn about other religions, not only to evangelize, but also to appreciate what is good in their example. I could learn how to pray in greater contemplative silence to him by putting aside more of my concerns as Hindus and Zen masters do. Father Doria, many of you are tired. Some of you want to go to confession. This forgiveness prayer will be short. Longer, more specific forgiveness prayers will come as the seminar proceeds. Jesus, you taught us to forgive 77 times 7 and to forgive our enemies. Please give each of us a spirit of forgiveness for each of the persons we have been remembering tonight. Amen. I was too tired to go to confession, but I was moved when Jim Marley came over to the table I was sitting at and gave me a silent hug. As I was falling asleep, I thought humorously, a widower who had a good marriage to a nurturing, motherly woman didn't necessarily want as a second wife a woman philosopher debater. So that's that chapter. And again, as I said on the session before where I introduced this book that I'm writing, you probably have questions about this. You could save the questions till you hear the whole book because I may have answers later. But if you want very much to write to me, the email is Chervin Ronda. That's my last name first. Chervin Ronda with no H, all lowercase, at gmail.com. God bless you all. Pray for me and for the church.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.